Welcome to Deep Narratives. We're so happy you've joined us today. Before we begin, tell us, where are you watching from? Which city or country? Share your answer in the comments below. We love connecting with you all. Today's story is full of deep emotions, unexpected twists, and powerful moments that will make you feel every heartbeat. Remember to subscribe and like the channel so you won't miss these unforgettable journeys that reveal hidden truths and heartfelt struggles. Now let's step into this moving tale together. The blazing sun dipped behind the jagged Rockies, painting Crestfall's dusty streets in hues of crimson and gold. In the heart of the market square, a woman stood alone, Lila Harper, a widow of 30 winters, her frame trembling yet unyielding. The townsfolk surrounded her, their voices sharp with accusation, their hands ready to cast stones. "Witch! Murderer! Curse upon her!" they spat, blaming her for her late husband Daniel's sudden mysterious death. Her bruised hands gripped a threadbare shawl, fingers white with strain, eyes blazing defiance beneath a veil of weariness. Eleanor Vance, the town's ruthless moral enforcer, prowled the crowd like a hawk, fanning the flames of hatred with every venomous word she uttered. The scent of dust and sweat mingled with the heavy weight of judgment that hung over Lila like a noose. Yet Lila's gaze did not falter amidst the shouts and stones. Her spirit, battered but unbroken, glimmered like a lone wildflower amid a harsh winter. Whispers carried through the crowd, questions unspoken, rumors thick with suspicion. What had truly happened to Daniel? Was Lila a victim or something darker? Above the chaos, a solitary figure watched from the shadowed ridge. The wealthiest man in Crestfall, Caleb Warrick. His rugged face, marked by years of loss and regret, was set in grim contemplation as his steel blue eyes pierced the turmoil below. The sprawling ironwood ranch stretched behind him, a silent fortress against the unforgiving frontier. What secret pulled Caleb's gaze to this condemned woman? What force would drive a man of vast power to risk everything for a widow scorned by the entire town? As dust swirled like restless spirits beneath the mountain peaks, a storm was gathering, one that would shatter long-held truths and forge an unlikely bond. The question lingered, heavy and urgent. What hidden story lay beneath Lila's scars, and who would dare protect her from a town that wished her gone? Beneath the vast, ever-changing skies of Crestfall, Lila Harper moved like a ghost through the narrow, winding alleys that cut between the town's weathered buildings. Each step she took was measured, cautious, and weighed down by the fear in Nye. Her heart, and the suffocating weight of judgment that seemed to cling to the air she breathed. The streets she once walked freely had become a labyrinth of suspicion and whispered accusations. Every glance from a passerby, every hushed murmur just beyond her hearing, reminded her that the town had turned against her, branding her with a scar far deeper than any physical wound. This was no ordinary cruelty. It was a collective bitterness, fueled by rumors and hatred, stoked relentlessly by Eleanor Vance, Crestfall's self-appointed guardian of virtue, whose venomous words spread faster than wildfire through the town's dusty lanes. Lila's days had become a series of silent battles, fought not with weapons, but with endurance and quiet resilience. She knew all too well the sharp sting of alienation. Before the sun had fully risen and cast its golden light each morning over the towering aspens that lined the mountain trails, Lila would slip from her humble cabin, carefully avoiding the main roads where prying eyes and hostile tongues gathered, like vultures. The chill in the air bit at her skin, but the cold was nothing compared to the chill she felt inside, a cold born of loneliness and a growing sense of despair. Yet even in this desolation, she held fast to a fragile hope. A whisper of strength that refused to be extinguished. The memory of Daniel's final hours haunted her like a shadow that refused to lift. 6 months had passed, yet the pain remained as raw as the day he collapsed in their small home. The night storm had been fierce, lightning flashing like the angry spirits of the mountains themselves. Rain pounded relentlessly against the roof, matching the storm inside Daniel's mind and heart. His voice, thick with drink and rage, shattered the fragile peace they had known. He raged against ghosts only he could see, his fists pounding the worn wooden table, glass shattering under the force. The bitter smell of whiskey hung heavy between them, mixing with the scent of damp earth seeping through the cracked windows. Suddenly, his fury gave way to something darker, a choking grip on his chest that stole his breath. Daniel collapsed, the color draining from his face as the storm outside roared louder. Lila's frantic calls for help went unanswered by the distant doctor, whose diagnosis was swift and final: heart failure. But the town refused to accept the truth. Whispers followed Lila: poison, curse, dark dealings with unseen forces wherever she went. The murmurs grew louder, poisoned by Eleanor's relentless gossip, which twisted facts into tales of witchcraft and malice, painting Lila as villain and victim in the same breath. Despite the venom hurled at her, Lila sought solace in the one sanctuary. Untouched by the town's cruelty, a small garden hidden behind her cabin, where wild herbs and delicate flowers grew in stubborn defiance of the harsh Colorado soil. Here she tended to sage, lavender, and chamomile, their sweet aromas a balm to her weary soul. These plants, passed down through generations of women before her, carried the wisdom of healing and resilience. She nurtured them with hands scarred, but steady, finding a mirror to her battered spirit in their quiet growth. Around her neck, a tarnished silver ring, Daniel's, hung on a fragile chain worn close to her heart. It was her shield, a tangible connection to the man she loved and the memories that no cruelty could erase. Lila's daily routine was a careful dance of avoidance and endurance. She avoided the mercantile where Eleanor held court, steered clear of the church steps where sermons of condemnation echoed, and never lingered long in the market where stares burned like fire. Each day, she wrestled with the crushing loneliness that came from being cast out, from the empty chairs at the tavern and the silent doorways she passed. The town that had once been a community now felt like a cage, every face a reminder of betrayal. But Lila's spirit smoldered quietly within this darkness, refusing to be snuffed out. Eleanor visited her one afternoon as the wind stirred the aspen's golden leaves. A sudden hush in the neighborhood marked the woman's arrival, whispers trailing her like a shadow. Eleanor entered Lila's small home with a smile that never reached her cold eyes, speaking in syrupy tones of concern and compassion. But her words were knives beneath the surface, thinly veiled threats wrapped in false kindness. She said of the town's watchful eyes, reputations hanging by a thread, and the dangers of defiance. Eleanor's presence was a reminder of the fragile ground on which Lila stood, a warning that even kindness from her could turn poisonous. After Eleanor's departure, the air felt heavier, the silence thicker. Lila retreated to her garden, hands trembling as she cupped the cool leaves of a growing sage plant. She whispered a prayer to the mountain winds, asking for strength to endure what was to come. As dusk settled over Crestfall, painting the sky in deep purples and fiery oranges, Lila's eyes lifted toward the horizon, where the silhouette of Ironwood Ranch cut a commanding figure against the fading light. From that distant perch, unseen eyes watched her, silent and steady, filled with questions and perhaps hope. The contrast between the town's harshness and the surrounding landscape's wild beauty was a constant reminder of the life Lila longed to reclaim. The aspens shivered gently in the mountain breeze, their golden leaves catching the last rays of sunlight like fragile promises. The scent of pine and earth filled the air, mingling with the faint fragrance of her herbs. Despite the cold judgment below, nature held no prejudice. It offered quiet refuge, a reminder that growth was possible even in unforgiving conditions. Lila's mind often wandered back to the nights she had spent beside Daniel's restless form, holding his hand through fevered dreams and storms. She remembered the moments when love was all they had left, fragile, fleeting, but fiercely honest. Those memories were her armor, shielding her from the barbs of the present. Yet the uncertainty of Daniel's death gnawed at her, a question mark hanging over every whispered accusation. She longed for the truth to surface, for the lies to unravel, but fear kept her silent. The town's cruelty was a storm unto itself, relentless and unyielding. But within Lila, a fire burned, quiet, steady, unbroken. She tended her garden, cared for the memories she cherished, and clung to the hope that somewhere beyond the shadows, justice awaited. Every day was a test of endurance, every night a battle against despair. Yet with each sunrise over the Rockies, Lila found a reason to keep moving forward. Have you ever faced unfair judgment? Share your story in the comments to stand with Lila. Caleb Warrick stood motionless atop the rugged ridge that overlooked Crestfall, the vast expanse of his ironwood ranch sprawling behind him like a fortress carved from redstone and wildflower meadows. Dawn's first light painted the sky in soft amber and rose, casting long shadows that stretched across the sprawling land. His broad and sturdy silhouette was a stark contrast against the fragile hues of morning. Every line etched upon his weathered face spoke of years spent wrestling the unforgiving terrain and the demons within. Once thick and dark, salt and pepper, hair now bore silver streaks that caught the light like threads of cold fire. His eyes, a piercing shade of steely blue, were heavy with haunted memories, reflecting pain buried deep beneath layers of stoicism. In his strong hands rested a brass telescope, its gleaming barrel worn smooth from decades of use. Caleb brought fire to his eye, steadying his breath, and trained his gaze toward the distant market square of Crestfall. Through the lens, he watched the figure of Lila Harper navigating the hostile townscape with a grace that belied the venomous glares, and scornful whispers directed her way. The widow's posture held a quiet dignity, despite the town's relentless persecution, her movements deliberate and poised. Caleb's gaze lingered, recognizing in her a reflection of a spirit he once knew, fierce yet fragile, battered, but unbroken. A ghost of his past stirred within him, weaving memories of a love lost and a pain that never faded. 15 years earlier, Abigail Warrick, his wife, had been cast out by Crestfall's narrow-minded populace for the very knowledge that now protected Lila. Abigail's healing hands had been both a blessing and a curse. The herbal remedies she crafted from the mountain's gifts had saved more lives than the town's physician could claim. Yet superstition branded her a witch, a heathen who consorted with dark forces. Caleb recalled the cold stares and the whispered accusations trailing her as she moved through the streets like a hunted animal. Despite his love and fierce protection, he had remained silent, his fear of losing everything binding his tongue. Abigail's death, alone and shunned, had left an ache that shaped the man Caleb had become. That pain fueled his relentless drive to build Ironwood Ranch into a bastion of strength and prosperity, a fortress impervious to the town's cruelty. The ranch sprawled across the foothills like a kingdom, redstone barns standing proud against the sky, wildflowers dancing in the breeze, mustangs galloping through vast corrals. It was a realm where Caleb ruled not just cattle but his fate, a silent power whose influence spread quietly through Crestfall's economy and politics. As Caleb lowered the telescope, his gaze settled on the distant aspens that shivered in the morning wind, their golden leaves trembling like whispered secrets. The sight was bittersweet. Nature's enduring beauty contrasted sharply with human frailty and malice. He thought of Lila again, how her resilience mirrored Abigail's, how her suffering stirred a protective fury within him. To watch someone so unfairly condemned by neighbors who once called her friend was a wound he could not ignore. His thoughts were interrupted by the soft crunch of boots behind him. Toby Gaines, the foreman who had served alongside Caleb for years, stepped into view, his face etched with concern. "Sir, Eleanor Vance's reach is tightening," Toby said quietly. "She's poisoning the well of Crestfall's opinion, stirring unrest and fear. If she's unchecked, no one who defies her will stand a chance." Caleb's jaw tightened. Eleanor Vance, the woman whose merciless grip had strangled the town's spirit for years. Her sermons of purity and righteousness masked a ruthless hunger for control. She wielded gossip like a weapon, bending the town's fears to her will. Caleb knew that confronting her would be no small task. Her influence was woven into the very fabric of Crestfall's daily life. Yet watching Lila, he felt a shift within himself. He could no longer remain the silent observer, haunted by past regrets. The woman who endured public shame with quiet strength ignited a spark, a chance to right old wrongs and protect the vulnerable. Caleb breathed deeply, feeling the crisp mountain air fill his lungs, grounding him purposefully. He scanned the horizon once more, taking in the sprawling beauty of Ironwood Ranch, the sprawling meadows where wildflowers swayed like a sea of gold beneath the barn's shadow, the dusty trails carved by countless hooves, the sturdy fences standing guard against the wilderness beyond. This land was his legacy, forged through sweat and sacrifice. But it was more than earth and stone. It symbolized endurance, a testament to survival against the odds. Turning to Toby, Caleb's voice was steady and resolute. "Prepare the horses. I remind Crestfall that tongues and sermons don't just hold power. Sometimes it's held in action." Toby nodded, understanding the gravity behind the words. Together they began the trek down the ridge, their boots crunching on gravel, a steady rhythm that echoed determination. Each step carried the weight of history and hope intertwined, a promise to protect not only Lila, but the truth buried beneath, years of lies. As they approached the outskirts of the town, the first rays of sunlight broke through the morning mist, illuminating the path ahead. Caleb's heart, heavy with memories but burning with new resolve, beat steadily. The man who had once watched silently would now step forward as a guardian, a force of justice amidst shadows. Ironwood's wildflowers swayed gently in the breeze, nature's quiet witness to a story unfolding, a story of courage, redemption, and the unbreakable human spirit. Caleb Warrick was ready to write a new chapter, one where silence gave way to strength, and where a wealthy rancher's shadow would protect a scorned widow. Caleb Warrick's horse thundered through Crestfall's narrow streets, hooves pounding against the sun-baked earth, stirring up clouds of dust that hung heavy in the scorching midday heat. The market square was alive with noise, jeers, shouts, and the harsh clatter of stones hurled without mercy. Lila Harper stumbled beneath the relentless assault, her shawl torn and dirt-streaked, breath ragged, her frame trembling from fear and exhaustion. Eleanor Vance's followers encircled her like vultures, faces twisted with hatred, voices sharp and merciless. Their words cut deeper than the stones they threw, accusations of witchcraft, murder, curses, each syllable a blade meant to shatter her spirit. The air was tense, the crowd's cries clashing against the desperate silence of Lila's defiance. She gritted her teeth, fighting the urge to collapse, flee, and give in. But her eyes, fierce and unyielding, met those of her tormentors, with a quiet fire that refused to be extinguished. The sun cast long shadows over the weathered wooden stalls and faded signs of the mercantile and saloon. highlighting the stark contrast between the town's merciless judgment and the dusty beauty of the rugged Colorado landscape surrounding Crestfall. Then, over the din, the steady beat of hooves announced an arrival that shifted the mood abruptly. All heads turned as Caleb Warrick rode into view, commanding attention, with every powerful stride of his bay stallion. His presence was magnetic, broad shoulders clad in a worn leather duster, a weathered hat shading his steel-grey eyes with a hard edge softened only by a flicker of concern. Dust trailed behind him, mingling with the heated air as he approached the center of the square, the rhythm of his horse's gallop silencing whispers and scattering jeers. Caleb dismounted smoothly, his boots hitting the packed earth with deliberate firmness. He carried a rifle in his hand, its polished wooden stock gleaming sharply in the sunlight. The crowd fell silent, the tension palpable, as all eyes fixed on the rancher, whose wealth and influence could sway Crestfall's very fate. Eleanor's followers exchanged uneasy glances, their bravado faltering in the face of his commanding presence. Without a word, Caleb raised his rifle, the glint of metal catching the sun and dazzling the onlookers. The sharp crack of its wooden stock striking the ground echoed like a gunshot, demanding attention and respect. The market square, once a chaotic storm of hate, stilled under the weight of his authority. Caleb's voice broke the silence, low, steady, and absolute. "Lila Harper is mine." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. "She is my bride." Shock rippled through the crowd. Faces drained of color, mouths opening in disbelief. Eleanor's lips curled into a snarl as she stepped forward, fury burning in her eyes. "You cannot claim her. She is cursed, an outcast, a sinner marked by death and darkness." Caleb met Eleanor's glare without flinching. "Ironwood Ranch feeds half this town," he said coldly. "Cross me and you cross the lifeblood of Crestfall." His voice carried the weight of unyielding power, silencing her protests instantly. Eleanor's defiance dissolved into a bitter glare as she retreated, swallowed by the murmuring crowd. Lila stood frozen, heart pounding, caught between fear and a new hope. Caleb's sudden claim was unexpected, his protection both a shield and a chain. Wary but desperate, she nodded in reluctant acceptance. The torment that had marked her days now faced a formidable barrier. Together, they moved toward the sheriff's office, the quiet steps of Toby Gaines close behind, his smirk revealing satisfaction and support. The worn marriage registry awaited them on the heavy oak desk in the dim, dusty room. Caleb's steady and sure hand picked up the quill and signed with deliberate strokes. Lila hesitated momentarily before adding her name, a fragile yet defiant act, sealing a pact that would alter her fate. Toby leaned casually against the wall, watching the union with amusement and respect, aware that this alliance irrevocably shifted the balance of power in Crestfall. Stepping back into the harsh sunlight, Lila's thoughts churned with uncertainty. What did Caleb truly seek? Was this a gesture of salvation, a gambit for redemption, or something deeper? The dusty streets held their breath as whispers of change swept through the town, carrying questions that only time could answer. What would you risk to protect someone? Tell us in the comments. The sun had set hours ago, leaving behind a twilight sky studded with countless stars that shimmered over Ironwood Ranch like distant promises. Lila Harper stood at the threshold of the guest room Caleb Warrick had offered her, the heavy wooden door closing softly behind her as the warmth from the hearth faded. The room was simple but comfortable, its walls adorned with faded landscapes and shelves lined with leather-bound books, whose pages held stories older than the town itself. Despite the quiet comfort, a restless unease stirred deep inside her chest. Caleb's kindness was a balm she wasn't used to, generous, protective, yet tinged with an inscrutable intent. Her wary eyes scanned the unfamiliar surroundings, her fingers tightening around the worn shawl she clung to as armor against a world that had branded her an outcast. Outside, the wind whispered through the tall aspens that ringed the ranch, their golden leaves trembling in the cool mountain air. The faint scent of pine and earth mingled with the herbal fragrance drifting from the small garden she had tended just days ago, a sanctuary she guarded fiercely. It was the very place where the legacy of healing, passed down through generations of women, thrived quietly despite Crestfall's harsh judgment. Lila found fleeting peace away from the hostile stares and biting words. The quiet was broken when Caleb entered the room, his tall frame filling the doorway, eyes heavy but resolute. In his hands he carried a leather satchel, worn and creased, with years of use. Without speaking, he laid it on the sturdy oak desk and unfastened the clasp, revealing a collection of papers and aged documents. "There are things you need to see," he said softly, carrying the weight of past regrets and newfound determination. Together they moved into the study, a room with rows of dusty tomes and antique furniture. Caleb knelt by a loose floorboard, prying it open with careful fingers to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside lay a bundle of brittle letters, tied with a faded ribbon. Lila's breath hitched as she recognized the familiar looping handwriting, Daniel's. Each envelope was fragile, the ink faded but legible, bearing secrets buried beneath layers of deception. As they unfolded the letters, a sinister revelation unfolded. Eleanor Vance, the town's self-appointed moral arbiter and relentless tormentor, had paid Daniel to weave falsehoods about Lila. The lies she had fought against for months, the whispers of witchcraft, curses and murder, were no mere rumors, but carefully orchestrated poison designed to isolate her. Eleanor's manipulation was a calculated act of cruelty, an attempt to destroy a woman who dared to stand apart. Lila's hands trembled as memories flooded back. The night Daniel had died, the raging storm outside their cabin matching the turmoil within. She recalled his eyes, haunted and full of regret, the moment he had refused to harm her, choosing instead to shoulder his pain. Daniel's heart had failed not because of poison, but due to the unbearable weight of guilt and fear. The cruel narrative that had marked her as a murderer was shattered by the truth hidden within those faded pages. Caleb's gaze softened as he drew another treasure from his satchel, a weathered journal belonging to his late wife, Abigail. The leather cover bore the marks of countless years, its pages filled with handwritten notes and sketches of herbs and remedies. Lila recognized many of the plants described, sage, lavender, chamomile, the very ones thriving in her own garden. Abigail's knowledge and gentle touch had saved lives, but like Lila, she had been misunderstood and condemned. Their shared stories, written in different hands but linked by resilience, forged an unspoken bond. The ranch that once symbolized isolation became a place of connection, where pain and hope intertwined. As the moon rose high, its silver light spilling over the corrals, wild mustangs shifted restlessly beneath the stars. Drawn outside by the restless energy, Lila and Caleb stepped into the cool night. Suddenly a mustang, startled by an unseen noise, reared wildly, panic flashing in its eyes. Lila's heart leaped as the horse thrashed against its tether. Caleb moved swiftly, calmly and steadily, speaking in low, soothing tones. His hands, firm but gentle, caressed the beast's flanks, coaxing it back from fear. In that quiet moment, a tender trust blossomed, two souls scarred and weary, finding solace in each other's strength. Days passed as their investigation deepened. Layer by layer, the truth about Eleanor's sinister plot came to light. Her hunger for control went beyond personal vendetta. It was a strategic grasp for Crestfall's social and economic reins. Through fear and falsehoods, She manipulated town leaders, dictated commerce, and suppressed dissent. The conspiracy threatened to strangle the very life of the community. In the flickering candlelight of the study, surrounded by documents and testimonies, Caleb and Lila prepared to confront the darkness that had shadowed their lives. Their alliance, born from pain and guarded hope, had become a force destined to challenge oppression. The wild Colorado night bore witness to a promise, a vow to reveal the hidden, restore justice, and heal wounds both old and new. Have you ever uncovered a hidden truth? Share your story below. The sky over Ironwood Ranch darkened swiftly, shadows creeping across the sprawling redstone barns and wildflower meadows as an ominous storm brewed in the heart of the Colorado Rockies. The wind stirred with increasing ferocity, bending the golden aspens and rattling loose boards like distant drums of war. Thunder rolled, deep and booming, shaking the earth beneath the ranch with a primal, echoing growl that foretold the tempest's coming rage. Dark clouds swirled overhead, black and swollen, blotting out the fading twilight as jagged streaks of lightning forked across the horizon, illuminating the rugged landscape in ghostly flashes. Caleb Warrick sat astride his stallion, muscles tense and eyes narrowed against the gathering storm. The herd needed securing. Panic had already begun to ripple through the cattle as the first fat raindrops struck the parched earth, softening dust into slick mud. Each peal of thunder drove a sharper urgency into Caleb's veins. The mustangs stampeded restlessly in the corrals, their hooves pounding a frantic rhythm against the ground. With a firm grip on the reins, Caleb urged his horse forward, weaving through the winding trails between fences and rocky outcrops, guiding the frightened cattle toward shelter. The wind howled like a wild beast unleashed, whipping his coat and tearing at the brim of his hat. Lightning flashed with blinding brilliance, the electric scars briefly illuminating the jagged peaks that towered beyond the ranch. Then, without warning, a deafening crack split the sky. A bolt of lightning tore through the air, striking a towering pine tree that stood sentinel near the edge of the pasture. The ancient tree exploded with a thunderous crash, splinters scattering, as its great trunk shattered, sending a shower of bark and branches raining to the ground. Startled, Caleb's horse reared violently, muscles coiling as panic surged through the animal's body. The sudden movement unseated Caleb, flinging him harshly against the rocky soil. Pain lanced through his side and shoulder as he landed awkwardly amidst the splintered wood and mud, the breath knocked from his lungs. The storm roared around him, rain pelting relentlessly, lightning flashing dangerously close. Caleb struggled to rise, every movement agonizing, but the urgency to protect his herd drove him onward. Hours passed with no sign of Caleb's return. At the ranch house, Toby Gaines paced the floor with grim worry etched on his weathered face. "Storm's no joke," he muttered. "Best wait till dawn." But Lila Harper's heart throbbed with a desperate fire. Fear gnawed at her resolve, refusing to be quelled by cautious words. She could not sit idle while Caleb faced the storm, alone. Mounted on Ember, a spirited mustang whose fiery chestnut coat seemed to blaze even beneath the gloom, Lila prepared to ride out. The ranch hands warned against it. Too dangerous, they said. But determination burned brighter than fear. Clad in a soaked duster and gripping the reins tightly, she urged Ember into the tempest. The rain lashed like whips, stinging her cheeks and blurring her vision. The wind tore through the trees savagely, tearing at loose branches and swirling mud in wild vortices. Thunder boomed overhead, shaking the ground beneath her hooves. Lightning illuminated the jagged path ahead in intermittent, eerie bursts, casting long shadows that twisted and danced in the storm's fury. Ember's powerful legs struck hard against the sodden earth, splashing through swollen creeks and muddy gullies as they pressed deeper into the heart of the storm. Memories flickered in Lila's mind. Caleb's steady hand, the warmth of his presence, the strength she'd come to rely on in this unforgiving wilderness. Each flash of lightning revealed the wild beauty of the rugged Colorado terrain and the dangers lurking in the shadows. Her breath came in ragged gasps as the tempest's fury intensified, but she pushed forward, refusing to falter. Finally, through the swirling rain and the cacophony of thunder, a figure emerged, slumped against a lightning-scarred pine, pale and battered. Caleb. Relief surged through her veins even as dread tightened its grip. She dismounted quickly, kneeling beside him, her hands trembling as she searched for injuries. His face was drawn, a sheen of blood matted his hair, his breathing shallow and labored. "You're alive," Lila whispered, voice breaking over the storm's roar. Caleb's gaze lifted, fierce and vulnerable. "Should have never let you come," he rasped. "Guilt's a heavier burden than this pain, Abigail. I failed her." Tears mingled with raindrops on Lila's cheeks. "I've feared trust more than lightning," she confessed, trembling. "But I'm here." She helped him to his feet with great effort, steadying him as they prepared to mount once more. Caleb leaned heavily on her strength, each step a battle, but neither wavered. Together they faced the relentless storm, riding through the wild night as thunder chased their every move. The ranch came into view, a beacon against the dark sky. Mud clung to their boots and water streamed from their soaked clothes, but the shared journey forged a bond deeper than words. Under the tempest's wrath, vulnerability gave way to quiet reliance, two souls intertwined by pain and hope. The storm had tested their trust, and as they crossed the threshold of Ironwood Ranch, a fragile promise lingered between them, one of protection, healing, and perhaps something more. The atmosphere inside Crest Falls Town Hall was thick with tension and anticipation. Townsfolk filled every available seat, their faces etched with suspicion, curiosity, and in some cases, reluctant hope. Sunlight streamed through tall, narrow windows, casting long beams across the worn wooden floorboards, dust motes dancing in the light like tiny specters of the past. The scent of pine mixed with the faint odor of old paper and sweat, creating a palpable weight that hung over the crowd. Lila Harper stood beside Caleb Warrick at the front of the room, their presence commanding and united. Both bore the marks of hardship. Lila's eyes still glistened with the pain of recent trials, while Caleb's rugged face was hard set with determination. Between them rested a table strewn with evidence, a bundle of yellowed letters tied with a faded ribbon, and a pounced, leather-bound journal, whose cover was cracked and softened by years of handling. These were not mere objects. They were keys to truth and justice. Caleb's voice, deep and steady, cut through the murmurs. "These letters," he began, lifting one with careful fingers, "were written by Daniel Harper, Lila's late husband. They reveal a conspiracy, a plot woven in shadows by Eleanor Vance to destroy a woman's life with lies and deceit." He laid the letters flat, allowing the crowd to glimpse the unmistakable, faded but resolute handwriting. "And this," he continued, opening Abigail Warrick's journal, "is a testament to healing. Her knowledge of herbs and remedies passed down and now entrusted to Lila." Lila stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fluttering nerves within. "For too long the truth was hidden behind fear and falsehood. These documents expose the cruelty that has poisoned our town, that has torn families apart." Her eyes scanned the faces before her, some skeptical, others beginning to soften. "We stand here not just to confront lies, but to heal wounds that have festered in silence." The crowd was silent, but restless, until Dr. Eliza Morton, the town's physician, rose from her seat. Her demeanor was calm and assured as she approached the front, carrying medical records and a detailed report. "Daniel Harper's death was not the result of natural causes," she declared. The symptoms documented match those of poisoning consistent with substances Eleanor Vance procured months prior. This is a scientific fact, not a rumor. The words hung heavy, the doctor's authority lending weight to the accusations. Whispers rippled through the assembly. Families who had once viewed Lila with suspicion now exchanged hesitant glances. Memories resurfacing of whispered warnings and unexplained misfortunes that had befallen neighbors. One by one, voices grew louder, testimonies unfolding of Eleanor's manipulation, how she had spread fear to consolidate control over Crestfall's social and economic life. Her influence had been pervasive, subtle, and devastating. The shift in the room was palpable. Hostility melted into reflection, and doubt gave way to recognition of a profound betrayal. Elders admitted to suffering silent coercion, parents shared stories of children ostracized due to unfounded accusations, and merchants spoke of lost trade, driven by Eleanor's machinations. Once torn by fear, the town's fabric began to stitch itself back together through truth. Eleanor, seated at the council's table, wore a mask of defiance, though cracks appeared in her cold veneer. Her eyes darted nervously as Caleb's unwavering gaze fixed upon her. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken threats. Caleb's voice, low and commanding, filled the void. Ironwood Ranch sustains much of Crestfall's livelihood. If the council wishes for the town's prosperity, support must be given to those who seek to heal rather than destroy. The weight behind his words was unmistakable, a reminder of power wielded through wealth and responsibility. Council members shifted in their seats, the threat implicit but explicit. Oppose this alliance and risk economic ruin. After a tense pause, reluctant nods signaled a fragile consensus. The council agreed to endorse Lila's proposal for an herbal clinic, a sanctuary where knowledge, compassion, and healing would replace fear and suspicion. Eleanor's facade crumbled further as law enforcement officers moved to arrest her, the venomous influence she had wielded for years dissolving under the light of justice. Her protests were futile echoes against the resolve of a community reclaiming its voice. Chains of silence shattered. The town's breath, long held captive by lies, was finally released. As the crowd dispersed, a hush settled over the room, replaced by murmurs of hope and renewal. Lila stood beside Caleb, her heart a tumult of vindication and apprehension. Though justice had been served, the road ahead was uncertain. The clinic represented a new beginning and a challenge, a mantle of leadership she had yet to embrace fully. Outside, the Rockies loomed majestic and eternal, their ancient wisdom whispering through the crisp mountain air. The golden aspens shimmered in the late afternoon sun, a reminder of endurance and transformation. At that moment, Crestfall seemed poised on the cusp of healing, its scars slowly fading beneath the promise of truth. How would you stand up to lies? Share your thoughts below. Beneath the expansive Colorado sky, the first light of dawn crept gently over Crestfall, casting a warm glow across the rugged landscape. The small herbal clinic stood proudly at the edge of town, a humble sanctuary built with hope and resilience. Its wooden walls, weathered by time, promised healing and new beginnings. Inside, shelves lined with glass jars and clay pots displayed dried herbs, sage, lavender, chamomile, and countless others, each carefully labeled in Abigail Warrick's elegant handwriting. Bundles of fragrant plants hung from the rafters, swaying softly in the morning breeze that slipped through open windows, filling the air with soothing scents, mingling with fresh earth and pine. The scent of herbs blended with the laughter of children playing outside, their joyful voices ringing across the sunlit courtyard. Bright wildflowers flourished along winding garden paths, tended tenderly by hands that had once known only hardship and suspicion. Townsfolk, who had once cast wary glances and whispered cruel words, now approached willingly, seeking comfort, remedy, and understanding. Faces once hardened by fear softened into smiles of gratitude as lives were touched and pain eased by Lila Harper's healing hands. Lila moved gracefully within the clinic's simple walls, preparing salves and tinctures guided by Abigail's timeless knowledge. The journal lay open on the wooden desk, its pages filled with recipes and remedies passed down through generations. Lila's eyes shone with determination and warmth as she blended herbs, mindful of each step that could ease suffering or restore strength. Every patient who crossed their threshold carried not just wounds of the body, but scars left by fear and betrayal. And with every act of care, those invisible injuries began to heal. Outside, under the vast canopy of Ironwood Ranch's starlit sky, Caleb Warrick awaited. The ranch's sprawling redstone barns and wildflower meadows glimmered silver in the moonlight. Soft rustles of pine needles stirred in the gentle night breeze, and distant calls of mustangs echoed softly across the hills. Caleb's figure stood, tall and steady as Lila emerged from the clinic, her silhouette framed by the warm glow from open windows. Their eyes met, and a quiet conversation flowed between them, speaking of shared struggles and hard-won hope. Fingers intertwined, they stepped onto the porch where the night embraced them with its cool serenity. With a tender smile, Caleb extended his hand, inviting Lila into a dance beneath the cosmos. The music was the whispering wind, the rhythmic pulse of crickets and the gentle rustling of leaves. They moved slowly, their steps harmonizing like the blending of two lives shaped by trials but bound by love. The glint of their wedding bands caught the moonlight, shining like twin stars, symbolizing unity and promise. Around them, the ranch lay peaceful, a world away from the harsh judgment that had once threatened to tear them apart. Nearby, Toby, Gaines leaned against a fence post, a mischievous grin tugging at his lips. "Looks like Crestfall's got itself a first lady now," he quipped, tipping his hat in a good-natured salute. Laughter bubbled among those gathered, friends, neighbors, and those whose hearts had been softened by Lila's courage. This was a celebration of union and a testament to resilience, redemption, and the power of second chances. As the night deepened, a quiet hope stirred, a hint of new life yet to come. Whispers of a future child, a symbol of growth and renewal, floated softly amid the stars. Lila rested her head against Caleb's shoulder, their breath mingling in the cool night, hearts beating gently. The Rockies stood majestic in the distance, their peaks kissed by the first blush of dawn. Stars glittered overhead like scattered diamonds, a celestial audience to Crestfall's transformation. Here, amid rugged beauty and whispered promises, a town once divided found healing. Lila's clinic was no longer just a building, but a beacon of light in the darkness, a living symbol of compassion overcoming fear. Did Lila and Caleb's love inspire you? Subscribe for more epic tales and tell us what shocked you most in the comments.